You're about to listen to the Complete Developer Podcast, the podcast by coders, for coders, about all aspects of life as a developer.
I'm Will, the curmudgeonly experienced developer.
And I'm Beej, the optimistic newbie developer. Welcome to another episode of Complete Developer Podcast. This week, we're talking about knowing when to automate and what to automate. This is mainly geared toward helping developers decide when it's a good idea to automate a process and how to best convince their boss of the value of automating particular tasks. But before we get started, Will, what have you been fighting this week?
I have been crawling into the weeds with JSON-LD, which is a metadata format that you put inside a script block, and Google can pull that in and do Google things with it. Yeah, so I've been going through YouTube videos and trying to get my head around that. I mean, I guess like the stuff that I had on search engines was a little bit crusty. And so I've jumped back into the fray on this, and yeah, I'm going to have to play catch up quite a bit. I know exactly how I want to implement it, but I don't know what I actually have to put on the client side because nobody says anything useful to me. So it's been a little bit of a pain point. So yeah, that's what I'm doing right now. How about you?
Well, I am sunburnt. Whew.
Yeah, you are.
If you guys follow me on social media, you've probably seen some of the images of my watch line. It's Memorial Day weekend, and I've had my bike out all weekend long. It's been awesome. Rode up to visit my dad on Sunday, rode to work on Saturday. The problem is, Sunday, I put sunscreen on in the morning, hopped on the bike, and yeah, I went and had brunch with my goddaughter and her family, and then rode up to visit my dad, rode around up in East Tennessee, and didn't reapply the sunscreen. So I had short sleeves on, not my sleeveless shirt like I've got now. So I have a true farmer's sunburn. Yeah. I got out today and rode, well, I was supposed to go on a ride up to Illinois, but the meetup group that I was meeting with changed the location. Apparently sometime the end of last week.
To Illinois?
No, they changed the start location.
Okay.
And so I went to the old location, and the new one was here in Bellevue, actually. It was at Shoney's. And so I get there, we're supposed to leave at 8, and I get there around 7:30, and there's nobody there. So I got my phone out, and I checked and saw where they had changed it. And so I posted a message, rode up here, and there was nobody there.
Man.
Yeah. That's when I called you.
Yeah.
Ended up going to Renaissance Festival with Will and his family, which was a lot of fun. I'm actually glad I did that because I think I had more fun doing that than if I'd gone. We were going up to...
Well, you can't really walk around with a beer in your hand on a motorcycle. That's sort of frowned upon.
Well, no. No, that's true. That's true. We were going up to a park up there called Garden of the Gods. To some hiking trails.
Okay.
So it was going to be a fun ride, and I think the people that got to go on it probably had a blast. But yeah, so I met them down at Renaissance Festival and hung out with them. However, on my way home, I ended up riding past He Who Shall Not Be Named's house. I got maybe a quarter mile past his house when I blew my front tire. Like, the bike starts swerving all over the place. I pulled over to the side and I'm like, what in the world? I looked down, and of course, front tire is flat as all get out. And I was like, well, what am I going to do? Because, everyone's out of town and you had come home.
Yeah.
So you weren't anywhere near. So I was like, well, I passed He Who Shall Not Be Named's place. And I was like, oh, I can call him. So I called him up. He's like, you need me to come pick you up? I'm like, I think I can limp my way to your place. I think it's like a quarter mile down the road. It won't be too far. Do you mind if I leave my bike there, overnight or, a couple of days because I have to work all day tomorrow? I was like, for a couple of days till I can get someone to come out and help me haul it to the dealership to get a new tire. And he's like, yeah, it's no problem. So I went over and hung out with them some this afternoon.
Yeah, it's been a long day.
It has been a long day. They have cats, and I have a mild cat allergy. So they dropped me off at home, and like my eyes were just like red as all get out from just being at their place for 30
like 10 minutes.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's been pretty cool. Kind of looking forward to this next weekend. Our audio guru, Jason, is going to come up and visit us. So
yeah, we owe him some margaritas, I think, at this point.
We may be even recording an episode or two with him. We'll see how that goes. But speaking of Jason, as always, roll the music. This week for IoTs, I have a bit of a warning for those of you working out in the corporate environment or small business, wherever, about an IoT project that could do some serious damage to your business. This is a $10 USB charger that can be converted to record keystrokes. It was created by Sammy Kamar. And he actually created it about a year ago and posted about it, but the FBI just issued a warning last week or so. If you guys follow us on social media, we posted on there too. But they issued a warning. It's an innocuous-looking generic charger that records keystrokes from wireless keyboards. And they're relayed via key sweeper to the operator. It can be over the internet, or they can be stored on a flash chip. And its effective range is similar to most Bluetooth gadgets, but it could be extended with an amplifier. There's even a web tool out there to allow live viewing of keystrokes. Yeah, and the really scary thing is it works even when unplugged. And I'm going to read to you guys a quote from the FBI warning. If placed strategically in an office or other location where individuals might use wireless devices, a malicious cyber attacker could potentially harvest personally identifiable information, intellectual property, trade secrets, passwords, or other sensitive information. Since the data is intercepted prior to reaching the CPU, security managers may not have insight into how sensitive information is being stolen.
Yeah, and this reminds me of a case, I don't know, it's probably been 6 or 7 years at the very least, probably longer than that, where security researchers were breaching systems basically by leaving USB thumb drives out, just laying around, because they knew that somebody would take it and take it to IT, and the IT guy would go, oh, let's see whose this is, and plug it in. And they were just getting nailed. So this is now an evolution of that, now that, hey, we can have transmission devices on there versus just a viral payload. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of scary, really, how this is evolving and how quickly this has actually happened.
Yeah, that's very true. And it's really simple to build. The hardware, it's just, you get one of those larger, kind of cheap, generic USB chargers, take out the innards, put in an Arduino and an RF chip. You got some other optional stuff like a flash chip, some Adafruit stuff, and I'm not going to go into too many of the details. I'll link the warning message that kind of talks about what can be in them if you guys want to look into it. This is kind of a scary thought, really. Yeah,
so this is pretty scary, and this is definitely something to keep your eyes on and see how this evolves, because I don't think we're done with this yet.
Oh no, and I'll keep an. As I learn things, I will bring them to you guys. I mean, I don't want IoTs to become scary stuff.
But there is scary stuff out there.
Yeah, there is.
And you can build it yourself.
Yeah. That's what's kind of creepy in a way. So this week we're talking about automation. Why do you want to automate things?
Well, obviously the biggest thing is getting rid of repetitive and annoying tasks. And of course, this is kind of a cornerstone of programming, right? That's why we're here. Another one that comes up is being able to do things when you're not present or you don't want to be present.
So being able to do things when you're off the clock. Yeah.
Yeah. And actually having, actions undertaken on your behalf by the machine is, it's quite handy.
It also allow you to react to changes or changing conditions when those changes occur if you're not there.
Yeah. Like for instance, at a previous job, I had a database query that I was supposed to run at 10 o'clock every night to make sure that some stuff hadn't broken. Well, I wrote a console app to run that query and get the result and, basically send me an email saying, hey, it's broken or it's not. I couldn't send actual data because of the sensitive nature, but I could say, hey, you need to look at this or you don't. Yeah. And that was quite handy because you don't want to have to be VPN, doing a VPN connection at 10 o'clock at night to go check something in a database.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I remember you telling me about that before.
Yeah.
No,
it was supposed to be fixed any day now. And that program lasted for like a year and a half.
Wow.
It's supposed to be fixed like within the next 2 days. And I wrote a script just so that I didn't have to mess with it. And that lasted quite a while.
Wow.
Yeah.
This will also allow you to scale productivity with the servers instead of people.
Yeah, because it's a lot easier to add servers.
Oh, yeah.
Because you especially just pay for them.
Yeah, I was going to say, paying for them has gotten a lot cheaper in today's cloud-based services.
Unless you have Azure.
Well, yeah. My goodness. Seriously, Microsoft. Dudes.
Yeah, I actually had to issue a stop payment and block them.
Yeah.
Because they kept billing me for stuff I wasn't using. They've got some problems internally over there. I don't really know what the deal is. And the thing is,
I don't think it's like them being jerks. I think it scaled up at one point and it never scaled down. And even when I went in and not physically, but even when I went in and manually
directly
scaled down,
yeah.
I was still getting billed at the higher level. It's like it just did not connect. And I don't know if they've gotten it fixed or not because I've stopped using it because of that. Because I can't trust them.
Yeah, I can't trust them not to empty my bank account.
Yeah.
Over something I'm not even really using that heavily. But being able to scale with servers typically is a lot easier than scaling with people because, for instance, if I have a repetitive task and it gets to be overwhelming, if I have that task automated where the server can handle it, I can throw more hardware at the problem, at the very least. So this is one of the big motivators more than the finances is just being able to scale. Because right now, like for instance, if I have to get another developer to do something or I have to get somebody that can actually run a SQL query and not screw things up, that costs money and it costs time. I've got to train them. I've got to get them access to the systems. Whereas if I'm able to just push this out and make the server do it, obviously that comes out as being a win. A lot easier.
Oh, yeah. You can also use it to make sure the system stays up when the cost of failure is really high.
Yeah. And that was like that previous thing I was talking about. That was there was a query that had to be run. Basically, if that query failed, we needed to mitigate that
immediately,
overnight. Yeah, like that didn't need to wait till morning. Mm-hmm. Because that's how you get people with badges showing up. Like it was no joke. You couldn't screw around with that. So the cost of failure was very high, and you don't want it to be a situation where it's like, okay, well, if I can't connect to the VPN, suddenly we have a problem, and I have to drive 30 minutes into work, in the dead of night. So these are the kind of things that you really, really want to make sure that you can keep up. And
I would also say this could include non-critical system failures that, by mitigating them early, you could avoid a cascading failure.
Yeah. For instance, if you've got something that's, I don't know, like let's say you have a message queue server and, somebody didn't make it scale properly and some non-critical process, has a tendency to fail and you have to clean something out, clean a queue out. Otherwise it, eats all the memory on the server. Mm-hmm. Not that I've ever had this problem. But if it takes that message queue server down, all of a sudden critical processes go down when this other thing was just sending junk email, basically.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Like,
that makes sense.
It's really...
So basically you avoid interruptions with higher priority tasks.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of the point too, right? Your life is a higher priority task. Mm-hmm. You don't want to get a 10:30 call that, hey, you've got to come into work, and it's 10:30 on a Friday night and you're downtown. Actually, at that particular job, that would have been a pretty short ride, but you don't want to be in that situation where you're having to come in and fix something.
Well, no, not at all. So, some things to consider first.
Yeah, and these are things to consider before undertaking automation. Like before trying to fix it with automation, like you need to weigh these a little bit. And the first one is one that I refer to a lot, and it's actually seems to have gone a little bit viral among programmers here lately because I actually heard other people mention it, somewhat out of context in a couple cases, but they mentioned it. And that's Gall's law.
That's the one where complex systems evolve from simpler systems, right?
Right. Okay. I mean, that's the way evolution works, right?
We talked about that with the some of the design pattern episodes, right?
Right.
Okay, yeah. I'm trying to remember when we discussed this. So
yeah, and so when you're automating something, you don't have to have a perfect solution, right? And the idea is that if you have something that's simple that works 90% of the time, that's still a huge win, right? This is why we have build scripts. They fail, but the idea is hey, when they don't fail, I don't have to do anything. And I can actually spend more time mitigating the 10% of the time that they do fail.
Yeah.
And, I get it's almost like collecting interest on a debt. I can now put more money in the account and I can get more interest because it's a cascading growth effect on your ability to efficiently use your time. So that's Gall's law, and that's something you really need to think about when you're talking about automating.
The next one is the Pareto principle, and this is one that is big across many different industries, and I've mentioned it in interviews several times and had to explain the 80-20 rule. And when you say the 80-20 rule, more people know what you're talking about than when you say the Pareto principle. So I've gotten to the point where I say, are you familiar with the Pareto principle? And if I get a blank stare, I'll usually come with it's the 80-20 rule, and then almost everybody goes, oh, yeah. But this is 80% of your results come from 20% of the work.
Yeah, and I'll give an example of this. And I probably lifted this from somewhere, and I can't remember where, so I apologize to whomever the author was. And I may not have lifted it. It may have just come out of my mind, too, so there we go. If you're talking about weight loss, right, for instance, you want to get fit, how hard is it to lose weight and actually get reasonably thin? Right.
Depends on your starting point.
Yeah, it depends on your starting point, but compared to the amount of effort it takes to get, model level abs.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Right. It's a whole lot easier. Like you can get 80% of the way there without really, really pushing too hard and being uncomfortable. Whereas if you go, okay, I'm going to look, I'm going to be completely cut and all that, it's going to start interfering with your diet, interfering with the rest of your life. Like it's the thing at that point. But if you just take it and say, okay, well, I'm going to do the 20% that gets me 80% of the results. I'm going to monitor my diet. There's certain things I'm not going to eat. It's relatively, simpler compared to the other as far as actually losing the weight. So from the perspective of weight loss, right, there's a 20% effort that can get you pretty well outsized results that get you a whole lot closer to where you want to be. And this is the kind of thing that you want to start thinking about when you're talking about automating something.
So what you want to do is automate 20% of your work and
80% of your irritation.
Yeah. I was going to say make it the 20% that counts, but 80% of the irritation.
Yeah. And that the other thing about doing this early, like build something like that handles 20% of the problem and then release it. Because what happens then is your time gets freed up and then you can deal with the rest. I mean, that's the whole thing. It like the whole exercise thing, right? Well, what's the first thing is, well, I want to lose enough body fat where I'm actually able to move around. Like, it doesn't hurt me to ambulate around. I don't get worn out. I'm not sick. I'm not stressed. It's not as bad. And then with that benefit, I can use that to get the rock hard abs if I want to.
Yeah.
Or I can use that to go do something else with the extra energy.
Yeah, it's at that point, it's a matter of what you want out of it. That makes sense. And last, under things to consider first, is Murphy's Law. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong.
Right. And this is one I've seen a number of times where somebody will write something, thinking, okay, this is going to be a quick script and I'm going to automate. But what they end up doing is they go, okay, if there's an error, send an email message and try again. Like, I've seen that sort of logic. It wasn't quite that simple, but it was on down there. And what happens? Well, their thing tries again and it fails and sends an email, and it hits the system again and tries again and fails. And it keeps doing that. And suddenly, instead of some stupid little query having to be run at 10 o'clock at night and it being moderately irritating, the production database server goes down. No, I did not do this. But I've seen this kind of thing happen where...
I've been studying exception handling lately because it came up in an interview, and it actually led to a really great discussion in that interview. But I've been studying up on it, and when you said that, I was just like, what were they thinking?
Yeah.
Because, like, my first thing is, it's going to keep sending emails and trying if you do that.
Because you basically have two concerns here. The first is if I'm automating something, I don't want to touch it ever again. Mm-hmm. Right? That's one concern. The second concern is I need to handle errors. These two things are not necessarily going the same way, right? It becomes a tug of war between those two things. And what ends up happening is somebody writes the error handler first, and then they get tired of it pinging them, and they're like, oh, well, it's just an intermittent error, so I'll just write a loop. And that works most of the time until the time that something's really wrong and it can't work. And then everything goes sideways. So you have to bake this in from the beginning.
Here's my thing. Why wouldn't you log the errors and then periodically send an email of the logs?
Oh, you don't ask why. Look, I mean, this is lazy man's way of doing things, right? Like,
well, see, that's lazy to me.
It is lazy. And
to me, my idea is log the errors and then, like, once or twice a day, send an email with the log if I want to check it. Other times I can go and look myself.
Right, but it was not that simple. It wasn't just in one function.
Okay.
It was a complex chain of events.
Yeah, I was just going with your example.
Yeah, and I really, really overly distilled that down.
Yeah, I think
what actually happened. But and part of that is to protect the guilty. But you want to think about the failure cases of your automation from the get-go.
Well, yeah.
Because when it blows up, you've got to have some sort of mitigation strategy there. Because what's going to happen? Okay, well, I'm automating this, right? Because I don't want to be messing with it at 2 o'clock in the morning or 10 o'clock at night or on a weekend. Mm-hmm. But what happens when it goes sideways? I'm messing with it at 2 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock at night, or on a weekend, and potentially in a much worse state if I'm not careful about my error handling.
Yeah.
If it exacerbates the problem. So this has to be baked in from the beginning, is understanding of Murphy's Law.
So those are some things to consider first. What are some of the costs versus the benefits?
Yeah, well, this is one of the items I put on the list as ways that you describe the way you're justifying this. And this is either justifying it to yourself or to management.
Okay.
And so cost versus benefit tends to be the only one that gets looked at, and that may not exactly be the axis that's best, but we'll go through this first because this is the most common one.
Well, that's what management is thinking. They're thinking, how much is this going to cost, and what's it going to benefit me in the long run?
Right. So, like, given how long it's going to take to automate a task, how long do you have to go not doing it once it's automated to actually break even? Because that makes it really, really easy to sell. Like, if you're like, okay, well, 2 days from now, we're going to be at the break even point. And then after that, it's gravy on this thing. Like that's pretty easy to sell that to management.
Yeah, whereas if it's something like 3 months from now, we can start automating. And then 3 years from then, we'll be breaking even.
Right. That'll never fly. Yeah. And it's okay. Like, you can still automate things outside of this, but the thing is this is the most common thought pattern. So you got to figure out a different way to put it.
Yeah.
If you're going to try to automate. But the biggest thing here is looking at what it costs to automate versus how much it costs, or what will be saved by automating it, and then comparing those to find a break-even point.
You also don't want to forget to include maintenance cost,
right? Because
for
it's
the new solution.
It's very easy to roll something out and go, "Oh, this automates this one task," but it fails 30% of the time, and I still got to jump in, and I've got to jump in some non-optimal time to deal with it.
Yeah,
and that cost adds up. And so you got to be very careful with these numbers to make sure that you're actually effectively automating in a way that saves, that cuts costs and cuts effort. And the maintenance costs can be a pretty big part of this, and something to consider because for instance, your maintenance costs may include another database server. Or things like that. Yeah, and you think, it's free because I can do that in the development edition of whatever. But you can't do that in production.
Oh, that's
so you have to think about licenses. You have to think about CPU. You got to think about all these other things as well. So think about the ongoing maintenance costs.
Also, I would say you need to consider what it's going to cost to do that in a non-automated manner.
Right, because if you're tying up a developer, like this is the other side of the equation, if you're tying up a developer for some stupid database query at night and it takes them an hour a day, then you only have 7 hours left, out of their day. What could they do in that hour that would be of more benefit? So that's the other side you got to weigh. And this one's hard because you're basically almost trying to prove a negative.
Oh, yeah, which is impossible, logically speaking.
Yeah. So you can get into some really weird places of this going, what could happen if we automated this? But that is something to consider and something that definitely comes up. I will say that if you do have this and it works, this is the easiest way to sell automation to management. It's also the most clear to you if you're just automating your own stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean, cost-benefit analysis is... Well, there's a reason it's the easiest way to sell, and it's the most clear to you, because this is, you literally put, this is what it costs me, this is what I gain. Does it even out, or does the gain outweigh the costs? If it doesn't, if the costs are more than the gain, you don't do it.
Yeah,
it's like, it's really simple.
Sense, yes.
Yeah, it's a simple model. I know we've just recently finished going over all of the design patterns, and the whole idea behind them is to take these things that we see repetitively in code and put them in a format we can think about. Well, this is a format we can think about really easily.
So another axis to consider if the cost versus benefit analysis doesn't work out when you're trying to explain this to management is the axis of opportunity versus drudgery. We mentioned this previously, that doing a task manually doesn't only cost in terms of the time and money to do it, but also in terms of the time and money that could go elsewhere. This is another way to consider this problem. There is a cost in doing repetitive things over and over again. In general, you tend to become complacent, and so you screw up over time. So if you can't sell based on cost versus benefit, one of the things you can also look at is go, okay, what happens when somebody is, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, and they have to do this process manually?
I hadn't thought about it that way, but that's a great selling point for management is if this is a repetitive task, it's not going to get your developers full attention.
Yeah, it's really not, and it's going to be like one of those little constant irritations that when they go somewhere else, they're relieved that they're gone because they don't have to deal with that thing anymore. So this can contribute to turnover. Now, bear in mind, these are all still cost versus benefit, but these are costs that are harder to quantify. Like if you are doing something repetitive over and over again, it is going to frustrate you enormously over time for the most part, especially if you're the kind of personality that actually likes to develop software. Like you like to solve these problems and you see that the problem is not getting solved and it's just being continued. Like that will wind a developer up, most of them, pretty fast. And so you want to avoid this just in terms of holding your team together.
Honestly, I would say the people that enjoy doing those repetitive tasks and getting really good at that kind of thing don't go into the kind of programming that you're going to want them to be able to do.
Right. This is harder to sell to management, partially because the numbers are hard to get. Like, if somebody is irritated at something they have to do every day as an employee, what does that cost? You can't really quantify that cost until you experience it, right? Like when they quit and you have to bring somebody else in and everything's busted and messed up for a while, and then you start seeing actual problems, like you can quantify that cost then, but you can't before then. And so this tends to be hard to sell to management because you can't tie this to an actual number.
At this point, it kind of becomes something that your lead developer or you have someone in like the low mid management range needs to see as this is something that I'm going to have to fix to keep my talent.
Right.
And they have to take it to upper management because coming from...
Or they just have to skunk works it.
Yeah. Coming from the lower end, from the developer end, it's not going to be an easy sale. But coming from mid to low management, saying, hey, we're going to lose our good talent because they're having to do this repetitive work, when if we take a little time to automate it, when and if it does go bad, it's an interesting problem.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too is let's say you do lose that talent. What do you have to do to the next guy? You got to train him to use your crap system that doesn't work.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's costs there, but these are harder to express in terms of direct numbers. So that's why we talk about opportunity versus drudgery. Because again, if you have automated that stuff away, those developers are now available to do other things. So that's the flip side of it. And depending on what kind of management you're interacting with, one of those or the other will work.
Exactly. Then you have the scalability versus specialization. Sometimes a task is manageable at the current level, but you know that you'll be doing a lot more of the same task.
Right. And this is especially pernicious in startup type environments.
Oh, yeah, I could see that.
Because what they'll do is they'll go, okay, well, yeah, there's a big thing right now that's like do things that don't scale so that you can get your company to the point where you can scale it. And things like, directly onboarding clients into the system.
You got a lot more experience with that than I do. But
you got a new client. You have a developer there that enters all the stuff that they got to have in the database, make sure the configuration is right, because you don't have all your systems built yet. It's very easy as a company grows to go, that's not that big a deal.
Well, no, if you've got like 5 clients and you're building...
Yeah, that's what you want to do.
That's because you want to put your focus in other areas than doing that. But when you get up, I would say when you get up to like into the tens of clients, even like 30, 40, 50,
yeah,
you're going to get to a point where you almost have to hire on someone just to onboard.
Well, let's say that you suddenly get venture capital funding.
Okay.
And you've been doing this manually. And all of a sudden, all this venture capital starts flowing, and it goes in the top of the sales funnel and brings all these people in. If you haven't predicted the fact that your numbers are going to jump before this, you're going to have a problem. And it's not based off of what the cost is right now. It's based off of what the projected cost is going to be if you leave it alone. And so you want to be able to scale by adding machines versus by adding people, because it's hard to get people. And we discussed this earlier. There's a lot of organizational difficulties with scaling a task, with being able to train somebody. You got to onboard your person into the organization. You've got to train them to be able to do a particular task that's manual and to do it correctly and not screw it up. And then you got to deal with the inevitable errors when they do screw it up, because nobody really does well on the first day of training.
Well, yeah, of course.
An organization that isn't automating a lot of things tends to not be very good either at their onboarding stuff or their training stuff or their recovery from errors. And so this is a way you end up with a perfect storm. And so what you want to do is you want to sell it as an opportunity to scale versus having to have specialized high dollar workers. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense.
And this tends to work a lot better with smaller, agile organizations that are growing very quickly. So like especially startups that are getting venture capital, like you may not be able to make a cost benefit thing, and the thing that you're doing may not really be all that irritating. But if you're having to do 7,000 of them in a day,
that would be annoying.
Yeah, you really want to automate that, and you don't want to do it when you're at 6,000, because then you don't have the time. Like it's one of those things of, hey, I'm selling this to management by saying I want to get ahead of this and move forward.
I could see that being a big sale there in that particular situation, because you're saying, hey, right now it's not an issue, but if we put a little bit of work on the front end, it can make the work later a lot better, to where we can focus on other things and we're not wasting our developers' time. Yeah. And so you're not paying them to waste time.
Well, and the other thing I've explained this to management with is being able to say, look, this allows us to be responsive instead of reactive.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah.
So like as you scale, it's not a thing of, oh crap, we have 1,000 new clients. What are we going to do? We've got to enter all these records manually. Like you don't ever want to be there. And the thing is once you're there, you can't get out.
No.
And, selling it like that, like you can sell it versus, the cost of specialization is very, very high versus the fact that the opportunity that's there in scalability. Like one of those two things will work when you're explaining this to management. The next axis is human factors versus inertia. You will see a lot of organizational inertia with companies that are a little bit older. So this is not early stage startups. This is somebody had a startup, they grew it up to a certain point, and it's kind of a almost lifestyle business for the owners. In other words, where they go, I don't have to really do that much.
This is the other side of that coin, the startup coin. Okay, that makes perfect sense.
So the human factors come into play, even if you can't make a business case in terms of cost. Like if you have developers that are not really overloaded right now, but they're having to do something manually, it still can often be worth it to automate things, for one, just so that they have something to do, and second, so that they are not constantly irritated. Because what happens to people that don't quite have enough to do and they're constantly irritated? What goes on in an office environment when that happens? You have
lots of pranks.
At
least if you and I were there.
You have a lot of breaks in team cohesion. You have a lot of back and forth, arguing and those kind of things over.
You get into pedantic arguments.
Bike shedding.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard that term?
No.
Bike shedding is like, let's say that if you were designing a $500 million nuclear reactor. Okay, you build, you got your plans for the facility, and you lay this whole thing out, but behind it, there is a place where people park their bikes when they bike to work. And you have all the arguments about that place.
Okay, that's kind of what I was going for, but I have not heard that term.
Right.
So that's a new one for me. I like it.
These factors come into play, and they can in established organizations more, where the developers I'm not going to say they don't have enough to do, but they're not overloaded. Right? They're not sitting there going, oh, we have a task list that even if we added 2 people, we couldn't handle. It's like, okay, we're managing our task load and maybe having a little bit more free time and all that. Well, what you don't want to do is have some of those tasks be repetitive, irritating things.
Yeah, because then they can start getting pedantic about, things that really don't matter.
Yeah. And so these human factors come into place in this situation. This can increase turnover, but it's really hard to tie to that task. Like, you can't go, okay, this is a repetitive task over here that's really, really irritating and everybody complains about it. And we lost 4 developers last year over this thing. What did this task cost us? There's no, it's always, okay, what does it cost to fix this problem over what, it costs to continue having the problem? Well, What does it cost to continue having the problem? That answer is null. We don't have a way of quantifying that. And so these sort of factors tend to come out. And so a lot of times the human cost of just morale and those sort of things and actually having a pleasant working environment can add into the mix. So, like, it could be something that you're spending more money than it's actually worth, but it's still better.
I would think this is something that on the business side would be harder to sell, but
you can sell it to the developers. You don't sell it to the business.
Well, you sell it to
that case.
Yeah, well, yes, but you sell it to the developers, but you sell it one manager at a time.
Right.
This is a path. If this is the path you have to take because none of the others are going to work or none of the others make sense, you go one manager at a time. Start with the development managers, the one that's going to benefit the most from it. Start there, work your way out and up.
Right.
Because
it's not going to start with the bean counters.
Yeah. I was going to say, selling the human factor is going to be a human factor equation. It's going to be a personal thing. If you can get one manager on board going, hey, you lost 3 people last year, and then you had to take the time to train 3 new people. You had a great team, and you're having to rebuild a great team.
Right.
We could make it so that doesn't happen, and you're able to keep the great team that you put all this effort into building. I mean, that's a very human factor sell. And to work the way up, you convince them. You get them on board, then you move to the next level up.
If you have to.
Yeah, if you have to. You may be able to get them on board, and then
you might also be able to convince other developers to do this as a skunkworks project.
Yeah, there's that too.
Because a lot of developers, when they get irritated enough at something, they'll fix it and they won't tell anybody. And I'm not going to say that I've done this, but I have. But where you script something off and you don't tell anybody for 6 months because it's a irritating, repetitive task, and you know that there is organizational inertia against actually fixing the problem. The thing is like, the bean counters are really happy about monetary fixes, but other people really functionally don't care unless it actually really affects them. Like, they see that, hey, my job sucks less because you fixed this. Mm-hmm. It's effectively a spectrum, right? It's pure numbers, for the cost versus benefit analysis. And then the next thing is we've got some numbers kind of, but not really, it's opportunity versus drudgery. And then it's scalability versus specialization. It's like, oh, this might happen.
Yeah.
And this goes more and more from the analytical to the emotional reaction to the way that you automate things, because that's how you sell it. Based off of what kind of person you're dealing with and what kind of environment and what kind of problem, you're going to be somewhere on this scale. And so this is the practical tips of breaking that down and going, okay, how do I need to approach this? So we have some key takeaways. The first one is the costs of doing a task manually have got to be weighed against the cost of automating the task and maintaining the automation versus what it costs to not automate it and the downside risk of that. Yeah. Like, that's the whole equation. You don't go, okay, it costs this much to fix it, or it's costing this much to not fix it. Mm-hmm. Like, those both sides of that equation are actually a little bit bigger.
Yeah, there's more to it than just fix versus not fix. It's what does it cost to fix it and maintain it versus what's the cost to not fix it and maintain not fixing it, continue to not fix it.
And the downside risk of each side.
No. Also, the automation of many tasks, they can be effectively argued for simply in terms of direct and easily traceable monetary benefits. If this is the case, it's easy to argue.
Yeah, and this is what you want for your ideal case because it's fast. Like it's almost it's basically a hack to get management to go along with something like this. Mm-hmm. This is the easiest argument to make, and you don't have to play any social engineering. It's like this is numbers.
The way we've gone through it has kind of been from a numbers game down to an emotional game.
Yeah, well, it's the 80-20 rule at each level.
Yeah, exactly.
You get 80% of the benefit from the 20% that's like, hey, here's the numbers that say this is a good idea. And then out of what's left, 80% of it is the next thing. And then eventually gets to the point where it's like, yeah, this just sucks. And this is that small sliver, but we can fix it. Mm-hmm. And here's how you sell that. And you can also argue for automation in terms of being able to scale versus actual costs. So this is what's the downside risk of not doing this versus what's the risk of doing it. And you can play that game without quite as many numbers.
Yeah, I mean this is like the once you have argued the numbers, argued the opportunity versus drudgery and the cost of losing developers, you get down to okay, the business is growing. We need to automate to be able to continue to grow. Otherwise, we're going to plateau because we don't have enough people to do the drudgery tasks, the repetitive things that we're going to have to do hundreds to thousands of without automation.
I actually had this discussion with management where I work because they scaled up their sales team. And I said, okay, you just put the egg in the snake's mouth. We've got to make the snake bigger.
Yeah.
Before the egg gets here, or it's going to hurt.
Yeah. A lot.
Yeah. And so that was the way that I discussed, the way that we needed to scale some things. It wasn't about monetary so much as, hey, the stuff is about to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And that's actually a more hopeful way of doing it too, because you're showing what could happen and what the upside could be. So it's just a really powerful technique for sales.
Yeah. And finally, you can also argue the frustration and irritation caused by certain tasks that make them candidates for automation. It's usually better to argue things financially first. We've kind of hit on this a bit, but sometimes you're going to need more than just a financial argument.
Sometimes it doesn't even necessarily make a ton of sense financially.
Yeah.
Because of the numbers that you have available. Now, it does make sense financially a lot of times if you had all the numbers, but you're dealing with, you're basically dealing with nulls and having to project.
Yeah, exactly. And I would also think that in a lot of cases, you may not have all the numbers because you're not up to scale yet.
Yeah.
And so you're working with predictive numbers.
Yeah, well, and your scale can also be wildly wrong.
Yeah.
Like, consider the traffic numbers on our Facebook page. I know you get that email every week too, and it's like, oh yeah, your traffic numbers jumped by 500%. Oh, they fell by 90%. It's like, okay, well, what actually happened? Well, like four people visited last week and 4 didn't this week. I mean, it's it's just, it was something like that.
It was like we had 5 people visit one week. And then 3 people visit the next week. So we jumped by 500% and dropped by 90%. I mean, this goes right along with the joke about statistics that, 40% of all statistics are made up on the spot.
Yeah.
Including this one.
Yeah. And so when you're dealing with things where the numbers are kind of hard to come by, sometimes you have to go the other way and sort of work around that.
But I like the way you broke this down to you broke it down in a way that I think.
Yeah, but I broke it down in a way that most developers do not.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point because I know the way I think. I don't know the way everyone else thinks.
Yeah, well, I mean,
whereas you've had more interactions with developers, so you know how more of them think, having talked to them and stuff. And this is like, when you broke it down, I'm like, well, yeah, that's exactly how you would do it. Especially when you get down to the scalability and then the human factors one, it's like two sides of the same coin of startups.
Yeah, but most developers that I've worked with will start with the human factors. This irritates me.
Yeah.
And, the thing is if you can sell it on a financial basis, that's a whole lot better. When you can actually get real numbers, like you shouldn't, most developers really start at the wrong end when they're talking about what to automate. And then the next thing is, oh, well, if this goes wrong, we're going to have to be able to scale and da-da-da-da. And, well, the thing is this is already costing you money. Like, this is already hurting you. Like,
the problem is what galvanizes the developers to do something
is not what galvanizes management ever.
Yeah, exactly. And coming from more of a management role and from mostly middle management, having to take, these are what my employees are complaining about, and make changes with upper management. To me, I'm used to taking that human factor and translating it into cost.
Well, that's what a middle manager does.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's most of my management experience has been in middle management. And so that's why when I read through your outline, I thought, oh yeah, that's exactly the way you would want to do it.
But most developers do it the other way, and most upper management do it. The upper management thinks from the top down, like the way I wrote the outline, but developers go backward.
Well, it's because the developers are the employees in this situation.
Well, they're on the receiving end.
Yeah, they are. Like, what I've had to do in middle management is take complaints of the day-to-day workers, the drudgery, the people who are in the mix, who are doing the hard work, take their complaints, convert them into a cost-benefit analysis, present it to upper management.
Preferably as an opportunity.
Yes, exactly. In this situation, though, the developers are the people doing the hard day-to-day work.
Right.
Which is not a slight on developers at all. It's actually saying nice things about you. Is you're the ones in the trenches doing the hard work. It's just your view and upper management's view is completely opposite, and you kind of have to think like a middle manager here to get things done.
Yep.
Either get a middle manager on board with you, or
go be like one yourself.
Yeah. At least think like one, because middle management is, in the management world, the absolute worst management job you can have.
Yeah.
Because when things go bad,
you catch it from every angle.
Yeah, exactly. The top blames you and the bottom blames you. When things go right, nobody compliments you. Yeah.
It's sort of like being a developer.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. I mean, like, psychologically. And the other thing is different groups of people have different risk tolerance and irritation tolerance.
Very true.
So the developers, they're enmeshed in this mess that's going on. And because of that, they have an emotional reaction to it. Whereas the top guys just don't. Like, they're not in it.
Well, the thing is...
But they have an emotional reaction to the company's finances.
I was going to say, to the developer, the bottom line is the crap that they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. To upper management...
Developer complaints are the thing that they have to deal with.
No, they don't. They don't have to deal with them at all. Upper management...
Oh, they'll hear about it.
They'll hear about it, but they don't have to deal with it.
Right.
Their bottom line is the money. Because who do they answer to?
Yeah.
Investors.
Or a board or an owner or something.
Yeah. Middle management, they're the ones that have to deal with the developer complaints and this is costing us money and not making enough. They have to deal with it on both ends. And that's what I'm saying. You kind of have to think like a middle manager here. This is like going to Google Translate, typing in something and hitting English to French or something. You have to translate to the language that upper management speaks to get things done.
That would explain some middle managers I've actually dealt with on occasion. Is they're translating from Russian to Icelandic to Japanese and Chinese and then back to English, and that explains completely how things get presented to upper management.
Yeah, and the thing is, you have some middle management that is really good at this.
Yep.
They speak business and dev.
Yeah.
And you have some that speak one or the other. They either speak business and they don't really get the devs that were working for them.
Or they speak dev and they don't get the business, and then they get demoted down into development again.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And to be good at middle management, you have to speak both. And the problem is the people that speak both get promoted up.
Yeah.
That's just my little side note.
Yeah, you have the Peter principle in full effect.
Yeah. But, that's my little rant. Before we close it out, Will, what do you have for us for tricks of the trade?
Well, you know how we're talking about automating things. One core principle that comes up as well, even before you automate something, is the concept of batching. And the idea of doing things in a batch is if you're doing small things, you can do a lot of them. And I just want to throw this out there because I know quite a few developers, and I've been this developer at various points in my career, that do things like keeping their email client open all day, doing tasks, kind of as they come versus doing the same thing a bunch of times in a row and just getting it out of the way and holding it back. Like I enter my timesheet, for instance, at the end of the week, every week, and I enter it for the entire week. And I've got a time tracker to keep that. The point of this is that it tends to be a lot easier to do a group of the same tasks in a row versus spreading those out and having to do all the context switching that comes into place. So in addition to automating, you can get a lot more efficient at the way that you do things if you break it into batches. So that's basically what I've got is start thinking about ways that you can group similar tasks, and you don't necessarily even have to automate them at that point so long as you're doing a bunch of the same thing at once. You'll still get a kind of a bit of a speed increase in your ability to do things. So that's what I got.
Stand by for Titanfall.
If you have a question or comment for us, please email us at neckbeards@CompleteDeveloperPodcast.com. Our theme music is an excerpt from Stand By for Titanfall by Pure Bells, available on SoundCloud and licensed under Creative Commons. The intro music for IoTs is Hillbilly Hip Hop by Jason Belcher. For references, show notes, and to sign up to our email list, be sure and check out the website at CompleteDeveloperPodcast.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at CompleteDevPod and like our page on Facebook to keep up with the news about the show. Thanks for listening. See you next time.